Welcome to She Been Ready, the podcast. She Been Ready is a conversation, a declaration, and a clarification that Black women have always led. On this podcast, I, Dr. Wendi Williams, educator, psychologist, leader, and auntie, will be joined by Black women who lead and those who have been led well by them. So, you don't have to get ready when you stay ready. And you can trust in the leadership of a Black woman because she been ready.
Dr. Wendi Williams. So I'm super hyped, y'all. Yay!
Yes.
I'm so glad it got to you in time too. So welcome everybody. This is so awesome. There's a couple of firsts happening. One is that this is She Been Ready, the podcast, first Instagram Live, which I'm just saying. So I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to be joined by two of my beloved friends and colleagues, and who are also two of the guests who joined us during our first season, so who were in those conversations with us. And one of the reasons why I felt like they were the best people to hand over the microphone for this live is because their work is about Black women and work. So I want to introduce these two wonderful humans. I'll start with Precious Stroud, who is the founder of the Black Female Project and also a PJS consultant. So I'll tell you a little bit about what her work is. Precious is a sought-after leader in the field of how asset-based marketing and communications for narrative change drives the design and implementation of marketing strategies that tell the right stories at the right time in order to increase impact and market leadership of community-minded organizations. In 2014, Precious founded the Black Female Project to illuminate and interrupt patterns of systemic racism and sexism that Black women experience at work. Okay, so when I met her, I was like, we need to be friends. And she could tell you I really said that. Black Female Project documents and publishes lessons learned and words of wisdom in order to promote healing among Black women. Precious demonstrates through her work the power of positively framed and future-focused language and campaigns to accelerate social progress. So, Nadia, I don't know if you know, but Precious partnered with our friend and colleague, Dr. Misha Mosley, and Misha Mosley runs the Black Teacher Project, which is a national organization. I see nodding, so there's that. And they have a project called Teacher Truth. So it's like one of those instances where the storytelling about a work-based experience, not just Black women in which they're doing that work, but there are a lot of Black women in teaching and education, as you know. So we are in good company. And so to one of my beloveds, Dr. Nadia Lopez. She is an award-winning global thought leader who is redefining education. She became a viral sensation after the popular blog Humans of New York featured her as one of the most influential people of this life and in the life of one of her students. In 2010, Dr. Lopez opened a school to close a prison in Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York, and which is considered one of the most undeserved and dangerous neighborhoods in NYC. The school is called Mott Hall Bridges Academy. I served as one of the first members on their advisory council when she was just getting started. It's a STEAM-focused middle school, but also focused on mental health and development of its young people, which is why I was involved and loved being in that space. And it became a beacon of hope for the entire community, where she served as the principal for 10 years. Her work has been featured across major media outlets, such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Glamour Magazine, Pop Sugar, Good Morning America, and The Today Show. Dr. Lopez has been named LinkedIn's 2019 Top 10 Voices in Education. She received the Black Girls Rock Award alongside our forever FLOTUS, Michelle Obama, in 2015. During that same year, she was also invited to the White House to meet with President Obama with her student who named her. So it was a really pivotal and big moment. The pictures are quite remarkable, but I can only imagine what it was like in that room. In 2016, she was bestowed the honor of Global Ambassador of Education and was recognized as one of the Varkey Foundation's top 50 Global Teacher Prize finalists. Her TED Talk, She has a TED Talk, and it's not a TEDx, it's a TED Talk, on the education revolution, has garnered more than 1 million views, and she has lectured at Harvard University's Graduate School for Education, teaching students on the subject of the school-to-prison pipeline. She's a best-selling author. She's written a book called The Bridge to Brilliance, and she's also co-authored Teaching in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which has become required reading at colleges and universities throughout the U.S. In 2020, she ended her tenure at Mont Hall Bridges Academy as the principal, and she did so as an act of preservation. This is actually one of the topics that comes up in our interview episode for She Been Ready, the podcast, because there was a lot of stress-related illness that threatened her life in that time, and she needed to leave. And so very grateful that she did. The experience inspired her to center mental health, wellness, and sustainability as she continues to impact education through her keynote, speaking, coaching, consulting, podcasting. She has a podcast called Detention. And her overall goal is to inspire 10 million educators who will transform the lives of 1 billion children. Are y'all ready? You've been ready. Yes. So I invited both Precious and Nadia to be in this space with me because I trust them and I love them. This work is incredibly important to me. It's a vulnerable sharing space, but one that I feel very grateful to be in and grateful to be in community with them about. And so the way things will go is like this. I'll read a little bit. We'll do a little call and response where Precious and Nadia will both share their responses to what I read, and then we can talk about some questions that they may have for me. And they are both well-adept professional Black ladies who know how to handle themselves in space. I'm really excited to just sort of be on the receiving end of their brilliance and their questions. Ladies, do we have anything that we want to clarify or make good before we get going?
No, but I do want to encourage people who are joining us to, add value by sharing comments if you have questions. And we are talking about Dr. Wendi Williams' Black at Work, Refusal and Recovery. And so I want to get into this because this has become the Bible that Black women need to have by their nightstand in their offices when they're talking to folks and they just want to clap back.
I love you so much. So I've been thinking about which part of the book I should read. So both of these ladies have read my book because they provided me reviews. So I'm going to ask you all what your thoughts. Should we talk about slash and burn, or should we talk about social emotional economics? It's the slash and burn.
For me, it's the slash and burn.
It's giving slash and burn. Okay. All right. So I'll read a bit. I'll try not to go on too long, but I want to read enough so that folks can have, yes, Desiree, you can holler in excitement. You have to do so with jazz hands with the emojis. So She Been Ready, the podcast, Dr. Wendi Williams' book, Black Women at Work on Refusal and Recovery. Let's get started. Slash and burn, which is in the second chapter. So, increased responsibility at the workplace can be seen as a good thing. It is a direct indicator of an employer's reliance on you and a sign that you are needed. Not necessarily valued, but needed. Enter the slash and burn. The slash is actually the typographical symbol indicating multiple roles and subsequent duties and tasks that come along with the job. The job can be the Director of Human Resources / Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion / Government Relations, or Vice President of Information Technology / Data Systems / Institutional Assessment, or Director of Marketing / Communications / Community Engagement. What is noted, or at least should be, is that between each slash is a whole full job unto itself. One that on its own would be difficult to accomplish within a 40 to 60-hour work week, and certainly requiring diverse learning and training experiences to make one competent enough to carry out the responsibilities associated with any one of these roles. When I have been in the running for various positions, a dear colleague and friend of mine, one of my sisters, will say something along the lines of, It sounds like another call for one of those magical Negro performance positions. She is critiquing the unrealistic expectation that any one person would have the capacity to do what is described. While I am usually applying for high-level positions, so a laundry list of things the would-be employer wishes I could do is expected. The fact is that the multiple slashes do four things. One, it's indubitably represented after one has been hired, not before. So it's not necessarily in the job description. Again, typically this happens as new needs or the individual's unexpected capacity is revealed while they are on the job. Two, it occurs for folks in an entry-level positions, sometimes low-skilled work with little to no fanfare or discussion about compensation. So it's just added on. Three, it very rarely comes with compensation commensurate with what a company or institution would have to pay in order to hire an equal number of full-time effort employees with benefits for that same work. And four, it often results in the person leaving. In essence, they are burned out and or get burned. Usually it's only after she expresses the real difficulty she has with completing the requirements of the many jobs and leaves that the company realizes that perhaps they need to hire more than one person to handle the portfolio of work or increase the salary to attract a new colleague to do the same job. A measure that had it been taken before she felt it necessary to leave would have communicated her value and worth to the company and in the long run save money as companies take a loss when these transitions occur. The slash and burn amounts to a veritable smack in the face for the colleague that has helped an organization to grow, but whose professional growth and compensation did not increase with her role expansion. My own mother experienced the frustration of knowing because everyone told her she was a highly valued employee yet not fairly compensated. For nearly a quarter of a century, my mother worked at a small to mid-sized company. She managed the office, but really she did much more than that. As happens, small operations require folks to do more than one thing. The office manager becomes a catch-all for receptionists, accounts receivable and payable, bookkeeper, executive assistant, and so on. My mother began this job after a few years of being a stay-at-home mom and starting a family with my stepfather and my two bonus siblings. Our family benefited from her investment in getting us situated before she returned to the workforce. In many ways, she took her skills of organizing, communicating, and simply making things better for having been in the room to this small company, and it prospered. However, I will never forget how helpless I felt when my mother, perhaps a decade pre-retirement, began to feel taken advantage of at her job. She knew intuitively, and because other people told her, they thought it was a compliment, that Bob's company would have failed had it not been for her. She did all the things that keep a company afloat. And just like many women who do women's work in the home, her work was not seen or seen fully. In one conversation, while I was across the country in graduate school, the first in my family to do so, she sought my help to quantify in dollar value what she did so that she could ask for a raise. In that moment, I realized I could not help my mother because I'd never done the type of work that she was doing. In fact, it was because she did it, her sacrifice, that I did not have to. When my mother retired, she was so ready to go. You know how some people wonder what their lives will be like if they no longer have to work? Well, my mother is not those people. She'd been ready. In fact, she wrote a longish letter announcing her pending departure 18 months ahead of the date. I convinced her that she might wait until 12 months before she sent it because she was ready to go. That timeline was still way ahead of the 2 to 4 weeks notice that we typically give, and yet she felt compelled to declare to them that she'd be leaving. She told me it was because they needed to prepare. Her boss had already began to hire his daughters, and my mother saw the entry-level pay rate his adult child, who was to step into her shoes, would receive. Let's just say my mother would have loved that salary upon entering the position, or the training my mother would provide her successor. She reasoned that they thought this adult boss's kid with a husband, a small child, and one on the way needed it. Funny how that same logic was not applied to my mom, also with a husband and 6 children at home when she began. Needless to say, I wanted my mother's seemingly obvious value to be recognized. Months ahead of her I'm out date, I called her boss to ask what they would do to celebrate her retirement. Once he realized that I would not be planning my mother's retirement party, he put his wife and daughters on it. They put on an affair worthy of her, flowers and the expensive food choices from their country club's catering options. were their ways of articulating how much she was valued. I may not have been able to help my mother quantify the worth of her work to build another man's empire as she prepared to ask for her worth in monetary terms. But I at least knew how to twist his arm to make him and his family do right by her and give her the celebration that could only begin to acknowledge what she gave. A party the size of a medium wedding reception is much less an expense than the rightful salary increases and benefits costs that would have been more useful to my mother and our family when she asked for them. I know that, and her boss knew that too. He saved big. All right. Whew, that's a little emotional to read. What do y'all think?
I mean, it's to take a pause on it and just, as you think, I wonder if people really could get the gist, because for those of us who both of us have in our hands, myself and Precious being able to read it, I started to reflect on my own position and thinking about, the word principal, but principal, HR director, financial director, psychologist, parent, mental health provider, community liaison, active. I had all of these responsibilities, compliance officer, and there was an expectation for me to show up to do all of these jobs, but with one salary, right? Within a finite amount of time, but there was no way for me to get it done during those hours that was under a contract, right? And so the minute you say something, the minute you open your mouth to say, this seems like a lot, I need support, you're like you're incompetent. You're made to feel like, are you equipped to do this job? Right? But it's like it's not about me being equipped to do the job. Am I equipped to handle all of the responsibilities that you're throwing at me and not recognizing that this is too much? And then when when we're speaking from the context of Black women, because we take this on, and then somebody else comes along who's, is our counterpart, and they're like, I'm not doing this. And folks, they put that boundary, I'm not doing it, and they're like, okay, who do we need to get to support you? And so we suffer in silence. We suffer in silence. And I feel for your mom, because when she had to see how much his daughter was going to make, which was far more exceeding what she earned, even though she's the one who really helped build his company.
That's correct.
And then your mom was still nice enough. I'm going to give them enough time to prepare. I was like, still giving grace.
Now, for anybody who knows me, I am much more fiery than my mother. So I had some expletives for what they could do with that time, but she really felt that. And what I will say to you is that that's not uncommon either. Giving people time to prepare. Have you seen that before? You both nodded. It's true.
Yeah. Well, that sense of ownership, I think that sense of how, I'll say as a young adult, watching the women in the roles, working at universities in particular, because that's where I started in tech, and then I moved into education, and I first started in higher ed. And watching my boss she was the only person that I know of at the time, and that probably since, was running both Associated Students and independent organization, the University Union, which had a whole facility, and the foundation at a state college in California. No one else across the system had that level of responsibility. That's 3 boards she was reporting to.
Okay.
And she invited me to, years later, to see her and to talk about what that did to her body. And she said, in my care team, everyone on my care team asked me, what did you do for a living? Because what we see is the manifestation of that stress. For her, at the time, In some ways, it felt like a badge of honor, I'm sure, because but I'm watching this, as a young professional, I'm watching them, her with pride and with planning and with a sense of I'm working for young people, and to then look back and feel good about the lives that she touched.
Yes.
But then to have this harshness of her experience and some sense that she had to go through that. There was some sense for her that she had to go through that as part of her own, because she wanted students to see her. She wanted students to see women in positions of authority. It was very difficult. And when she left the university and they asked, well, who's reading? I don't know. Who would be interested? There's not enough money. Not to say that I didn't have my own journey in that regard. I mean, and that was one example. But I also noticed it a lot in nonprofit work, and when we started Black Female Project, hearing women talk about how much they were doing, and then just realizing, like, and I know, this conversation about and I know, it would take 3 people to do your job.
Yes.
So why don't we get clear about what you want to ask for, and or what you're willing to walk away from? Because that goes back to, Nadia, your point about, or maybe it was part of what you read and then Nadia confirmed it. Some of that is linked to your survival. It's linked, this notion that somehow this work equals my survival. And that disconnecting or undoing, once it happens, it feels really good, but it's hard to because of the conditioning, it's hard to undo that. And I'll stop there because there was a lot in not only what you read, but in what we were privileged to read.
Well, I'm going to try to discipline myself, but I will say just one thing, which is that it's one of the reasons why I'm such a follower and lover of Tricia Hershey's work. Because there's Precious, when you talk about our identity, and Tricia Hershey being the writer, the Nap Bishop, the Nap Ministry, to restless resistance, I should say that. But when you talk about identity attached to work, and survival and pride attached, it's complex. We were brought here on ships, Black women, the story of how we've crossed that Atlantic, no matter how we are here, through the Caribbean, through the US and back. It was a conversation with our bodies about our labor long before it happened to occur with our minds and our hearts. And to be quite honest, it doesn't always happen with our minds and our hearts. And that's, I think, the revolution that we're in right now, where people are hearing what we're saying and listening finally. That's what our mothers are getting to witness. And so that's why we need to speak, I think. But this idea of working like that to survive, because first hired, first fired, making sure that you are seen as so necessary to the functioning of this organization that you can't be let go when that happens, because we saw the types of job loss and poverty that hit Black communities in the 70s, and all the rest. But also this relationship with our identity to hustle culture and work culture, and the ways in which that harmed from living in that way can live on our bodies. Literally the physical health. And I know, Nadia, your work, and most recently the decision to leave Mott Hall and to really transition, is so much about paying attention to that and giving people a pathway to recover from that. And so I just think that there's so much there. But I want y'all to be able to ask me questions, and I'm going to try not to be the controlling person. It's hard because I'm a teacher and a psychologist and a middle child who's bossy. So I definitely just pull the microphone and take over now.
So I wanted to read a part, but then also make a connection to something. This is part of page 31, the Passover. And it basically says, work is stressful for Black women. Given Black women's role in the U.S. historically labor context, it's no wonder. No matter their work conditions, environment, or status, Black women carry a disproportionate burdens in the form of labor stratification and disproportionate exposure to hazardous conditions, bullying, harassment, and vulnerable to disproportionate psychological, and physical health incidents, unhealthy coping behaviors like of alcohol, job outcomes, and negative effects on their family's well-being. And that stood out for me because our pain is normalized. The ways in which we have to carry the burden is normalized. And what we don't recognize as on our families, right?
Nadia, something's happening with your sound. It's distorted. Can you hear her? Can you hear her okay, Precious, or is it just me?
It was going in and out.
Yeah, because you're dropping gems right now, and I don't want anybody to miss the beautiful jewelry you're about to give us with these pearls. Try again. Yes.
Do you hear me now? Okay. So my decision to leave, two reasons was, one, you know, we have this fear of finance. Where are we going to be able to get a job that's going to securely provide for all of our bills and our family? But the Department of Education decided that they to cut me off, right, of my paycheck, cut me off of health insurance. I was out sick because of them, right? And so that was one. I was like, wow, they don't even care about my family. They don't care about my well-being. But I have to take care of other people's children. I have to put them first. I'm the first one in and the last one to leave. People are saying it's going in and out again. So as I'm saying this, just bear with me, y'all. I'm gonna look for my headphones.
I was all about.
Okay.
I hope it's better now. We'll see. And so that was the first point where I realized, they don't care about me. But then I recognized that I was setting the example for my Black daughter to show up in workspaces and to think that this was normalized. That the only way she could be respected, the only way she would be acknowledged for her work was that she would have to sacrifice herself. And I wasn't willing to do that anymore, right? Because I recognized that in that moment when I was in the hospital, the very first time I went to the emergency room, it was my daughter in her senior year of high school when she should have been celebrating her last couple of weeks with her friends. She was in the emergency room with me, right? And so psychologically, what did that do for her? Because she had seen me over the years pushing myself beyond the limit, right? Over the years, she had seen me go in and out of the hospital and having to deal with these different health issues and having the insomnia and dealing with the stress and not having the therapist to work through it and coming home and being short and angry because I'm just so tired and I don't want to be bothered with anyone, right? How was I formulating for her what it meant to be a Black woman in this world? And so I can no longer do that to myself and I couldn't do it to her anymore. And that's why I say that this book is so important, because it was heavy, because I felt seen and I felt heard, but I felt guilty. Like, I wish I would have read this as in my late teens, in my early 20s, as I was going through college, as I was preparing for the workforce. I wish I would have had this to at least give me context of what I would encounter, but also to have the language that when it does come up, that it's not me, not to blame myself, and to seek community that would support me through it, right? Now I'm 46, my body, my insides are like a 60-year-old because of all the stress that I put on it, right? And so we can't undo that. And so for anyone who has experienced this, I want to first say it's not your fault, but I also want to thank you, Wendi, for taking the time to put our pain down on paper, to give us something to reference, for us not to feel alone, and for us to engage in the work that needs to happen in order for us to truly heal. Because you took it back with this.
You're gonna
you took
make
it back.
But I appreciate you saying that, because it's a lot of honesty in there. Precious, how about you? Goodness gracious, Nadia, you know this is a problem. It's a good problem, but it's
as I was thinking about today, I just kept thinking about the language, that I'm grateful for the language. That was the piece that was missing. You can feel something's off, and we can observe if something's off. We can talk about what's off, but without the words to describe it, and then I'm going to say analysis, which I think is technically analysis, but that going back, but we're looking at historical, we're looking at present, and then we're invited to look at our future. Yeah. That's the piece that I really loved. And so the part that for me set right here is why are Black women shushed? And it stopped me because I learned so early how to live in that space of not making other people uncomfortable, but also understanding clearly that in certain spaces, which is why I loved working for Black women who saw me clearly. But then I was watching what they were going through when they couldn't speak up. So the excerpt I had in mind, it says, every time a Black woman or girl is expected not to have a contribution and is therefore engaged as if she has nothing of worth to share, she is being shushed. She is being reminded that in this space, that is likely every place outside of the community of other Black women and communities in which she leads, she does not matter. And then it goes on and talks about so many other examples that are worth reading, listening to, however you can get it. More conversation. Amazon Prime, available right there on Amazon. They deliver 24/7. And then the writing about how to understand what that means. What does it look like? How does it feel? Yeah. Then what happens? What are the consequences? Then what happens at work? How do you shift it? Whose responsibility is it? And the first person you name is Black women. But then there's other people too, right? The people who are doing the shushing and the people who are observing the shushing. Yeah. And certainly shushing may or may not be the word that we use, but there are many other words here. And also language to use, but that consciousness that it's not me. The isolation is the piece that increases the stress. So the pressure to perform, then the isolation, self-isolation, because I'm trying to work so hard, the isolation within the context of the workplace. Now I have some sort of stress. It's going to show up one way or the other, even if I love what I do. That's right. It's still not normal to have that kind of pressure and isolation as the motivator. Then the dissonance starts, and then I override the dissonance. I override my body saying, I override it. And then what happens? For me, it was sitting at a desk and everything going blurry. And trying to figure out why can't I see? Like really, literally looking out the window thinking, the poster. Go down the hall, talk to the RN. And she's like, oh, if you can't see, you should go home. And I was like, I can't go home. I have too much work to do. I don't know where you live, but I'm the only Black woman in leadership at the organization serving in a director role. I can't go home right now. So all of those narratives, that's what I had to start unraveling, all of it. So the healing journey started from there, but understanding that, so what happened was I started getting ocular migraines as a result of workplace stress.
Yeah.
I had never heard of an ocular migraine. I had never had a migraine before. Thankfully, leaving and starting Black Female Project and a bunch of other things that helped me on my healing journey, they within a year, the headaches were gone. But it was amazing to me, the power of that very unhealthy, unseen, and intended to be hurtful for me, right? Intended to be hurtful for me and many others, frankly. So so the shushing got me, and because I learned it so early, and then I had to adapt, and then each place is different, so you're constantly doing this kind of equations and math. But then one can step into it, that liberated freedom, right, where one is who she is, and then whatever's going on around, I mean, that's peripheral. But society keeps reminding you through movies, through everything. So there's this constant undoing of that, what's mine to own. And a lot of that's not mine to own. Certainly I can step into it, but all the other things I can step away from. What I have learned is that unpeel this onion, or however I want to describe it, is because the messages are constant, even in our social circles, and even with our mentors sometimes, that it's this, it'll be ongoing. Because from your perspective, where you started the conversation, is I didn't come by choice. So there's a whole mechanism in place for me to continue to serve at other people's will and benefit. That these are the conversations that are making it change, that are helping us step out of that. And then elders who are saying, don't do it like that. I'm sure there's a better way. And then the letting go of the job. Like, it's just a job. We can all get another job if that's what we want to do. But even that thought is somewhat revolutionary. But this is what you invite us to do every other page.
I have a question for you, Wendi. I mean, like I said, reading it was hard, right? Because I had to sit with it. Like, I was on a plane, like, Jesus, I ain't got no tissue, but I don't want the people looking at me crazy. I would imagine it was cathartic, but what was your healing process? Because a lot of this is, even when you said reading about your mother, just even in this conversation, was emotional for you. What was it like writing?
Well, I was not healed when we were writing this book. In fact, the story of this book is that I was invited to the opportunity in 2017, 2018. And I have had anybody who knows any little piece about my story, but I'll give a brief, just sort of aha here, because I think that the universe was conspiring for me to grow all the way the hell up. And so here she is. She's a full-grown woman, but she was not where she began. I was in a position. I actually talk a little bit about that role in the book because a lot of the material came from there. And I was invited to write a book in a scholarly way with personal narrative. And I was like, yes, because I have a lot of publications. They're all very scholarly written. Nobody really reads them. And for me, it's my family, my sister friends, who either feel like we are having intelligent conversations or I'm lecturing them. I don't know. Maybe it's both. So, there's a way in which that can come across, and I'm aware of that. And I thought I could put this all in a book and tell it through story and tell it kind of through, my sense of humor and my sense of like just viewing the world and having an impression and an opinion about it. And so I took a position at a university that began in the summer of 2019, and then March of 2020 hit, and there was a pandemic. And then the next month, that university started to have public conversations about needing to go through a merger and acquisition. I had never been a part of that. I had no idea what that would mean, but we were the acquiring, the part that was going to be acquired, not the acquirer. So anyone who has that experience knows how painful that can be. And I was a leader in that space, a middle management leader, but still a leader. And so it's difficult to be in a position to go to be involved and invited to be in a position of some level of power, to have that sucked up and out, and then not quite know where that sits and how to be oriented toward that, and also lead an organization. Needless to say, I left. But that was a 2-year process. And I actually couldn't finish writing this book because I was so stretched and stressed and trying to figure out things in that space. Omicron hit in end of 2020, 2021, I believe it was. And my travel plans got suspended. Now, the pandemic, for me, helped me to see how much sleep I wasn't, how much rest I wasn't actually getting, because I stopped having to leave the house, which means I could have a later start time. I think a lot of people had that. I don't want to pretend like the pandemic was a vacation, because it's not. But that was a revelation in terms of, for me, sort of just being connected to how my physical body, my embodiment, was sort of shaped by work and the things I ignored versus the things that we stopped ignoring because we had time. And so when Omicron hit, my travel plans for the holidays were usurped. And so I was home for about 3 weeks with a bunch of unfinished chapters. And I slept for 3 days, and then I woke up and I was bored, and I was like, well, I guess we're going to finish the book. And so I started pulling things together. Nadia, you and I were on the phone a few times during that time. And I just started pulling it together, making it make sense. By then, a lot of the social and the cultural moments that happen publicly that are used as examples in the book happened. So Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, even UK was an interesting thing that made some sense to me. Kamala Harris on the stage asking not to be shushed over and over again started to make sense to me. Beyonce getting all the awards and getting none of the awards that matter the most, in some ways made sense to me. I'd seen it time and time and again, and I knew that other people did too. So I was able to start to sort of merge the theory with the practice and with the examples that are in the world. But I would say actually my real healing and real sort of pulling it all together and digesting it all happened during the month where I paid for myself not to work between positions. So I left the position that I shared with you all, even with the merger and all that, in early September, and then I took a month off. And I didn't do anything I didn't want to do. I only focused on my podcasts and different things like that, spend time with friends, and I could afford to do that, and I feel grateful because it allowed me to rest, and it made me feel like I had purchased my freedom. Because it's true, I had. If I felt like I had to jump into the next job because of bills, right? And you said that earlier, that was, both of you actually talked about that sort of pressure to pay bills and pressure, but also trying to recognize that I need to take time. But I was able to purchase, and I'll say it again, purchase my freedom. And the fact that in 2022, I was purchasing freedom that apparently had already been legislated to be given to me felt interesting. And it's another reason why I see those links between the NAP ministry and thinking about rest as resistance, because she's specifically articulating a relationship to capitalism and being on the grind and grind culture. The only thing that gets grinded in grind culture is your body and your mind and your spirit. That's what gets ground down. And so having that month, as my therapist said, to reset my vagal tone, because she was like, your whole stress response is out of whack. Your body is just on all the time. So just to reset the body, allow the body to reset. And I noticed in terms of my own healing, what that meant for me in a new position and in a new moment in life. What has happened for me is that I don't tolerate anyone's foolishness. Now, my friends and family will tell you that I don't suffer fools, but secretly I was kind of suffering them. But now you'd be hard pressed to see me give it much time or attention. And it's not out of braggadocio. It's out of and it's not out of preservation, it's out of thriving. Anything that gets in the way of me thriving, smiling, living well, and joyful is not allowed to stay. I just put it all out. It's like trash, you just put it out outside the door. And that's the boundary I set. So it's interesting, because now I enter jobs or enter consultation spaces about what I am going to do, what I'm not going to do. I was very clear. And I kind of know, I kind of go into
Mhm.
those situations knowing that before I get there, so that the conversation can be clear, and it can either be quick or we can have some depth and spaces of where to go. But being, I do not tolerate being asked to go beyond what I said I was going to do. I always do what I said I'm going to do. And I do not tolerate being asked beyond what I said, because it actually irritates me that somebody is actually rubbing up against my boundaries like that. Why are you laughing? You're smiling. What?
Because I could just hear you in a meeting, like in the face.
Yeah.
That's all.
No.
That's it. Know your friend.
Yeah. No, it's real. I actually had a meeting in January, and it came out before I could say it, which was, oh, so you want me to do what I just said I'm not going to do? And another Black woman in the room looked up like, whoa. And I was like, yeah, that's what we're talking. We're not. And it was a colleague who was a white woman who asked, and I thought, she said, and I'm all their boss in that space. And she's like, that was a tone set that I've never seen before. And so that's different. But I needed her to see it too, because that is what my leadership, and I think that's why my leadership and having people with a certain mentality in their leadership in this space is so important.
And that's why, I said that I had to make that decision for my daughter, right? The same way you had to do it in that meeting is because when you make that personal shift and you create that non-negotiable and you set those boundaries, you allow others to say, okay, it's on. I'm not doing that either, right? But we don't often see that. And so it's interesting, because those very same people are looking and waiting for the fallout. Like, okay, so what's going to happen after? Because I'll tell you this, when I told Sine that I was leaving, right? Even though I put in my resignation, and here's the thing, I didn't give time, right? I did it July 1st at 11:59 p.m. and it was effective immediately. It's over, right? Like, I'm done. Because at that point, the doctors weren't giving me additional time on my life. So, and they didn't give me time when they took me off of payroll. So there was no need for us to have like me preparing you, because technically the assistant principal was in the position. I made all the arrangements by having someone there, and I guided her through the time that I was out. So y'all already got it set. I don't have anything set. I have to figure out my next chapter. So just like you, I felt like God literally said, they cut you off, don't fight. Because it was like, I need to go back to work. No. If you can sustain yourself through this, I will maintain you. Right? And so that was the freedom call, because it's ingrained in us, the benefits, the identity to the job, right? The title that comes with it, the power that comes with it. Because the first thing people say is, so what you going to do? Like, what's your life going to look like? And it's like, I wasn't born into this position, right? Like, I have every right to, the same way I could change my hairstyles, I have every right to show up and change a job, right? And so we have to literally not only, it's not even about fighting ourselves and in terms of we have to stay grounded and say what we're not going to accept, but it's also people have to recognize how they also put the pressure, the people who love us, right? They put this pressure, and sometimes we are beholding to that. Right. And you and I was on a late live that time, and we started talking about Beyonce, and I was like, even with her, right? Like, it's not to bring the celebrity, but even with her, with all that she's done, all that she has amassed, the ways in which she has, had influence and racks in all this money, she still can't get acknowledged. Right. And so I'm a push and say to folks, it's a book to be read, but it requires you to sit with yourself, not to blame yourself for anything, but to just recognize how the world is intentional about harming us and forcing us to see like we're not human in many ways.
Which is why we have to be intentional about taking care of ourselves. Well, we have time for maybe one more question. I'm not quite, how do y'all want to, let me stop trying to manage. How do y'all want to?
I'm thinking about the subtitle of the book, or the phrase, and then this popped up in the chat, I refuse. I would love to hear about, when you say on refusal and recovery, what does that mean for and to you? And for it to mean to us?
Yeah. Well, we have to give a shout out to Avala Lemon, who is the refuser in the comments. Hello, Avala, good to see you. On refusal and recovery. So ultimately, it's all the acts of not, it's all the ways, refusal are all the ways and acts. And I talk about it in the book in terms of sort of where this is coming from, right? So I borrow from two places, indigenous, and indigenous folks who, continue to make us be accountable to the fact that the land was stolen and that they've never given up their sovereignty at all. And so there is a politics of refusal that they engage to continue to lay claim to who they are and what, who they are and whose they are. That I think is such an important example. So I draw from that work. But I also lay claim to the tradition and the practices of our ancestors, of my ancestors, who also refused. There are a number of them that are whose graves are at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean because they refused. They said no. There are many that showed and demonstrated refusal, whether within the context of going underground and having militia types of armies and resistance. So to make sure that the enterprise of enslavement and the enslavement of Black people didn't go on without some fight. But there's all types of refusals. I remember being in a predominantly white, progressive white, liberal, educational, I'm in higher ed as well, space, and deciding, I was one day wearing my protective style, which basically looked like 3 or 4 plaids, and I was like, I'll wear this to work. I'm just going to do that because I know that they have an expectation around Black people and hair, and that our hair changes too much. I also know that that there's a way in which we it was pre-Crown Act, but I lived in Brooklyn and in New York, so natural hair in Black women is fine, so it wasn't, but there was also this way of which what types of natural hair are fine. And so I wanted to play with that a little bit. And so I decided just to do that and see what happened. I was still the person in the role that I had, doing the work that I was doing with the accountabilities that we had. And I thought, I'm gonna make, let's just see how this goes. These are small refusals. It's the small things. It's the ways in which, but there are also larger refusals as well, as Nadia talks about, as you talk about, Precious, actually just leaving and having to leave and make that choice for yourself. I think that what I ultimately want to get out is that when we say no to dealing with the oppressive dynamics of white supremacist patriarchy, organizations, cultures, and attitudes and behaviors as Black women, and I would argue that Black women can serve as a model for a number of communities that need to say no in a particular way. We say yes to ourselves, and that's where the recovery is. And so whenever we disallow someone from shushing us, disallow ourselves from, for example, just taking on another slash and saying, let's talk about what's happening here. So I do this job and this, so what is this over here? And so how are we structured that into my job description? Just need to talk about this and work this out. Have we gotten this clear with HR? And, how's the FTE navigated here? These kinds of things. The kinds of things my mother didn't have and the kind of language I didn't have for her. So precious when you talk about how important language is. It's so important because, you can be oppressed by the thing you can't describe. It becomes a thing around your neck, to quote a term or a phrasing. And so, but if you can name it and talk about it, and even to hold it up as a question, I didn't say yes to this, we're going to explore this together. That's an act of refusal. It's having someone stop short of just assuming that you bought in and they can just have you any way they want you. And what I find happens is that it's not only when you engage these kind of practices, and you all know I'm a psychologist, so I really do think about it in these terms. When you start having supportive, protective, healthy boundaries in one area of your life, it will subsume other areas as well. You'll start to draw a line around, I don't know about how I feel about having to have that gulp swallow in my throat and feel this way in the pit of my stomach. Who's asking me to do that? And who do they think that they are that they can even pose that question? That becomes the thing. And I think inside of every refusal then, in terms of begging the question, posing it not only for yourself, but also extending it out toward other people to say, is this what you're asking? Do you realize what you're asking? Do you mean to be asking me this? You can tell by the intonation that it's like, yeah, you have some nerve, but also you're asking yourself, is this what they're asking? Do they have a right to ask you that? Is this what you're signing up for? It gives you an opportunity to stop short and to recover pieces of yourself that get chipped at and taken away with each allowance, with each giving of yourself without the fanfare that needs to be there. Whenever I'm making a consent, you need to know I'm giving you something, because what I'm giving is great. And that's the other thing. No one's giving me a job. The fact that what I do and how I do it, you're welcome. You're welcome. Everything, and I say it unabashedly, everything I touch turns to gold. And most women that I know who work in the ways that I do and the ways that we have been socialized to because of this history this country do. So you're welcome. And also not without the proper compensation conversations and discussions around, honoring, just being respectful. We ain't even got to honor, just be respectful. So I think it's the refusal allows for recovery. And it's okay to say no, and you don't have to scream. But I'll tell you this, part of why people holler, yell, and scream is because they don't feel like they're being heard, because they've been shushed. And that's why we get these reactions, and then we say, oh, she's angry. So you push somebody against the wall, and then you wonder why they respond the way they do. It's not fair. Anyway.
So when is the course coming out?
So funny.
This has to be taught in some way, shape, or form. So, people need access. I'm seeing an online course because it cannot be contained in one particular, not. People need to be in conversation, building strategies, and using this as a tool so that it can become the seed planted throughout the world. So I'm just, I want to know.
I do have this podcast. So this whole conversation will transition to the podcast. And I'll say something, Nadia, people like my mom wouldn't have afforded or thought that she could do the course. So there's a part of me that wants to make sure that we eliminate the paywall for those who, right? And I know where you're going. I can see you looking at me like the way you're looking at me. And then the other part is, too, that there's also room for registration. Please, Desiree, stop. There's also room for the other piece, too, and we can talk about that through, so I do consultation and things of that nature. And I'd be open to that in terms of really doing that type of work, intentional and deep work with folks who do have the capacity to engage and grow in that way. Because it's a course, but it's also a process, I think, about when we talk about the healing spaces and pieces there, too. Well, we are at time.
I'll circle back.
I'll let you circle back.
Yes,
we can circle back. I want to say just a big, huge thank you to everybody who joined. It's been so wonderful to see so many names of friends and fam that I know and that I don't know. Like, wow. Kiana, stop. And so these are really all ideas. Yeah. So we have been thinking about retreats and courses and all these types of things.
Yes,
and
Kiana.
ways to structure
Yes.
these conversations. And so this is just a start. But also in terms of where the information can be accessed and available through not only the stories that I tell in this book, Black Women at Work on Recovery, Refusal and Recovery, but you know that a lot of that comes through in the podcast because there are so many women with so many stories, including the ones that the two of you were willing to tell, and that people can learn from as well. But structured learning opportunities are available as well. All right.
Okay.
Thank you both for being here. I just adore and appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I will be sure to share when the link is available for the full conversation for this first live of She Been Ready, the podcast.